Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Sifted Talks. My name is Zosia Wanat, and I normally cover Central and Eastern Europe for Sifted. But today, I'm going to wear another hat and moderate the discussion, which I think is crucial to startups from every corner of Europe, and not only my region, how to grow their recurring revenue. To do that, I'm joined today by a fantastic panel of speakers. Let me welcome today Sara Grana, Head of Revenue Strategy and Operations at Babbel, Sam Lockwood, who is responsible for revenue and financial automation at the UK sales team at Stripe, and Johann Jenson, SVP of Product at GoStudent. Thank you so much for taking the time and for being with us here today. Thank you to everyone who's tuned in. I would like to remind you that we are open for questions. The panelists will be very happy to answer your questions throughout the debate. So please don't wait until the last moment, because then we won't be able to take all the questions during the last 2 minutes. But please do ask them during the debate. I will try to incorporate them into our discussion. To do that, you have this Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. It should be pretty straightforward of how to use it. Okay, so as a warm-up question, Sara, Sam, Johann, could you please tell us a little bit about yourselves and the company that you represent today? Maybe let's start with Sara.
Yeah, sure. So as Josia said, I'm the Head of Revenue Strategy and Operations at Babbel. For the ones that don't know Babbel, we are an online learning platform. We are actually the most sold online learning platform in the world. I need to say this because otherwise the HR manager, might kill me. And we have a lot of basically an ecosystem of things to make you learn the language. So we have an app, we have podcasts, games, we have also live classes, and we cater for both B2C and B2B. I mostly take care of the B2C area of the business, so most of my insights will be coming from that. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much. We are having another startup representative here today. Johann, could you please share your experience with us?
Absolutely. Cool. Well, yeah, it's great to be here. Thanks a lot, Zosia. So I work for GoStudent. I lead the product organization. So GoStudent is one of the world's leading tutoring providers and education platforms. So we're working towards a future of hybrid learning. We do one-to-one video-based tuition, also group lessons in some jurisdictions. We have virtual classrooms that with proprietary software. I lead a number of squads that are working on kind of the different parts of the tools and experiences that make up GoStudent and the EdTech platform. So I have my background is kind of quite varied. I used to work in international relations for the UN, and most recently I've been working in Europe for the past 8 years. I scaled a fintech startup called Grover, based out of Berlin, for 4 years, and I joined GoStudent about a year ago. So yeah, I look forward to the conversation.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And Sam at Stripe, can you please tell us a little bit more? Well, we all do know Stripe, but if you could tell us a little bit more about what you do at Stripe, and also how do you work with other startups when it comes to recurring revenue?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we shouldn't assume that everyone knows Stripe. So Stripe is a fairly new sort of 12-year-old payments company at its heart, and that's what it was built on, but is really looking to kind of scale up as a broader kind of financial and revenue automation platform. And I'll explain a little bit more what that means in a second. But my role at Stripe is a product sales specialist, so I support predominantly recurring revenue businesses to take that recurring revenue as effectively as possible through all the different infrastructure that Stripe creates. So as I said earlier, kind of you all know Stripe predominantly maybe is taking credit card payments, taking local payment methods, etc. but we're also building a subscription management and invoicing and financial reporting suite on top of that payments infrastructure to allow recurring revenue businesses to operate more efficiently and to not have to build so much in-house software themselves. So that's really my role at Stripe, is to help those recurring revenue businesses grow as quickly as possible.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much for these introductions. So let's kick off the debate on the main topic right now. Just a very, very general question for the beginning. So what should startups take into account when they set up their recurring revenue strategy? So let's say I am an early stage startup founder and I would like to set up a strategy for my company. What are the main things that I should look into, that I should take into account, that I should consider? Of course, keeping in mind that every company is different and there are probably many differences between those strategies. What are the main things according to you? And maybe Sam, you would like to take it first.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a couple of things to consider. Firstly, kind of what is your go-to-market strategy? Who are you selling to? And what type of sales experience will those customers have? And that's really going to often define the type of recurring revenue that you as a business might have. You might be a very high-touch SaaS business selling multi-year contracts where you want them to pay all up front and the ticket value is going to be very high for those invoices. That will require a very different recurring revenue strategy to a consumer business setting up like a streaming platform, for instance. So really understanding like what your go-to-market strategy is going to be and what the type of customer is going to look like. And then from that, trying to then think about, okay, what are the ways that I'm going to charge them? How much flexibility do I want to give my customers in terms of payment methods, in terms of frequency, and such like. And then also, I think it's really important that businesses also consider not just what we're going to do today, but what are we going to do in a year's time, in 2 years' time, in 5 years' time as we scale up. I think one of the things that Stripe's seen a lot of is ripping out billing systems or subscription management systems mid-cycle as you scale up can be a really, really painful activity. So trying to think early stage about what our sort of 2 to 5 year plan is and trying to take that into consideration when you're building your initial recurring revenue stack is incredibly important. It's really difficult to do as businesses pivot, but trying to give yourself as much flexibility as you can when you make those decisions is for me a really important strategy.
Perfect. Thank you so much. We will get back to this scaling up part in a second. But now, Sara, Johann, whoever would like to go first, I also would like to ask about your experience at your respective startups. I mean, what is important for you in your roles? I mean, what are the main features that you look at that you would recommend other founders to look at?
I go first, Johann, sorry. I agree with everyone that Sam said, especially the looking into the future. Like a lot of times for a startup that, is pretty early in the game, they just focus on acquisition and not much about like, how are we getting this recurring revenue coming? And even companies that have been here for like years, they still don't know what is the split in your revenue, like how much is coming from new users versus if it's a subscription business and a recurring subscription running or upgrades or win backs, like having always this clear view and understanding, okay, at this point in time, I'm focusing on acquisition, that's fair. So then my share of this, bucket is going to grow versus the bucket in extensions. And other times, now I need to focus on the customers that I have right now. So like having always through, like since the beginning, this clear understanding on where the revenue is coming from is crucial.
Perfect.
Yeah, so I'm glad to that. Like, I think I'm coming at it from kind of an overall like product perspective, and often in the early days when you're just starting out, you're trying to think, okay, well, do I have product market fit? Do people want this, and will they pay on a recurring basis for this, right? So it's not so much about optimization in the early days, but I do think, and having seen a few companies scale to hundreds of millions ARR, what Sam said really rings true, to think about how this scales into the future, how your internal tools and how your payment and billing systems will actually scale. Because like you said, ripping it out later on or replatforming is very expensive. But I don't think that should be, in the early days, you're really just thinking of, do people want what we're offering, and will they continue to pay for it? And is churn under control, right? So I can speak to like the early days at Grover, like those were the big concerns around, okay, can we make sure that we're not, fraudsters are not taking advantage of us? Can we make sure that people are continuing to pay? So we had this house party strategy, which is basically like, if you run out of food and drink, people will leave the house party. So how do you make sure that there's always food and drink at the house party? Just getting the basics right. And then in the years after that, when you hit certain milestones, when you've got that product market fit, then I think it's the time where you can start to optimize. And there's a few other, I guess we can talk about that in a bit.
Mm-hmm. And would you be willing to share how have you done it at your startup? So at Babbel, at GoStudent, maybe at Stripe. Johann?
Yeah, sure. So I was speaking to kind of my previous company, Grover, but what we did there is we kind of like then moved on to, once we understood that we had a certain level of product market fit, we got like churn under control. Then we called it the love maximization strategy. So it was really to focus on the customers that we can really make the happiest and make them ambassadors, right? So make them the biggest fans for what you're doing. And then that's when like things like referrals and things come in. I think a lot of companies right now are thinking, okay, how do we drive organic growth? Because we don't want to be spending, we don't have access to capital. So in the case of GoStudent, for example, a lot of what we've been doing over the past, because we scaled so fast in the early years, we built a lot of manual systems. And now we've been thinking, okay, how do we automate these things? How do we improve the customer experience? And so part of it is kind of like creating all of these self-serve options. Now also with AI, we can automate a lot of the customer support tasks as well, which is fantastic, while keeping a certain level of customer service and keeping it human, right? So ironically, AI has made actually the business more human, and providing a better service level. So, I think there's a lot of other things I'll get into, but I'll pass the mic over to Sarah or Sam, maybe.
Mm-hmm. Sarah?
I guess like, because from like a really stage startup, like I don't really have much knowledge there. I have more knowledge like later on, but sure. Yes, like having this understanding what is your market fit, and once you have that, start optimizing, start growth loops. Also have that, like, how am I supposed to grow to make sure that you build a product that allows for that? Like, you don't want to be into a situation that you have a product that is not flexible enough, and then you want to play around with enablements for different pricing packages, and you cannot do that because you didn't build for that. So like sitting and making sure that what you build is flexible enough for the long run.
And I guess, yeah, the final thing I can add is just what I've experienced in terms of what other Stripe users have come to us and said as they grow their startups is, and this is why Stripe has a very kind of two-tiered approach to kind of how it services its users, is we've built a load of self-service, no-code capability to bill your customers so that you can be super scrappy at the start, get an invoice out, work out whether the customer's going to pay that invoice, and if they don't, try and find out why they didn't pay it, so that you can really test all the different pricing models that you want without having to do a bunch of dev work. And then as that product market fit kind of materializes and you really understand kind of what your pricing strategy should be, you can then start to integrate those capabilities more into your core API and actually do not go down the self-service route with Stripe. So that's kind of what the feedback we got from a lot of users is. They want to have that ability when they're very early stage to just be able to log into a dashboard and start sending out invoices to work out whether what the service they're providing is worth paying for. So that's just the last thing I can add really on that.
Yeah, maybe to add to that, Sam, like I think that's also the approach that GoStudent took in the early days, because they just had such pull coming from kind of students and parents, right? And it's like it started before the pandemic, and then during the pandemic there was just like this explosion, right? And it's continued since then. And so we didn't have the time to think about those tools. So things like Stripe actually helped us kind of get through without having to scale engineering and product teams to support kind of the basics, right? So and it wasn't limited to payments, right? It was across all of the infrastructure requirements that we had. We tried to find third-party low-code or no-code tools to kind of get us there, and then later kind of aggregate and kind of remove some of the low-code stuff for in-house solutions or kind of more scalable options, basically.
Mm.
Perfect. Thank you so much for sharing these experiences. I would like to remind everyone that there is a possibility to ask questions. Please don't be shy and ask questions. And now I would like to ask you if there are, when you set up these strategies, are there any like main differences when it comes to B2B and B2C startups? So like, do you approach your customers, whether they are businesses or customers, differently? Sara, I thought maybe you would like to start because like you have those two.
Sure. So I mostly work for B2C, but I do have some insights on the B2B, right? So when it comes to retention strategies for like B2C, it's a bit more straightforward, because like if they're using your product, you're kind of like fine. But with the B2B, you have like the buyer persona that their needs might be different. So you might be in a position where actually the users are using your product, but for whatever reason, it's not the benefits of using your product is not linked to a business goal. So that's the key thing. Like when you sell to B2B, you need to understand how does your product fits to one of their business goals. And from the first goal, you need to have that clear, because moving forward, this is what you need to return to, like always, hey, but this is the ROI that we are bringing to you. And for example, like for us, learning language, imagine you're like a company that you have one of your customers is in Italy. So you want your team to learn Italian. And then this client, they go off, so you don't need Italian anymore. Even if your employees are using the product, Babbel is not relevant anymore for you. So that's like one of the key difference when it comes to like B2C versus B2B. And also with B2B, it comes like way more like involvement. You can have like more personalization. You have usually like, consumer success managers that they talk to the buyer. Like you cannot really do that when you have, millions of subscribers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So yeah, and on my side, like I think my experience, like I used to work for Hilti, which is a B2B power tool manufacturer prior to Grover, but half of the revenue actually came from subscriptions. They called it fleet management, which was so construction sites would rent the power tools or they would lease them, right? And then Grover's model was actually to rent consumer tech, so things like tools that you needed to do your tech job or whatever it might be, a laptop or a phone and so on. And so I went from B2B, and then Grover is actually a very B2C fintech company. But what we did really well, I think, at Grover in the early days is that we built out B2C, and then we started scaling B2B using a lot of the same tactics that we had for B2C. And some things kind of didn't go so well, right? So we had a marketplace, for example, where you could pick all of your products, but that's actually not how businesses purchase or do procurement, right? So you needed to kind of adapt the internal teams to like, create these sales teams internally that could land and expand with these B2B customers. Then you had other companies like Everphone that started B2B purely, right? And so and they started from a very different strategy. But what I really liked about what Grover had was that we'd cast a very wide net to all of these B2C customers, and all of a sudden there's not that big of a distinction between who a B2C customer and a B2B customer is. At the end of the day, everybody worked for some kind of company, right? And so that's what Airbnb has done really well, is they've recognized that all of their travelers are also working for companies, and so it helped them build out that B2B market share. So I think in my day-to-day a lot about distribution and how we can drive distribution. And this is what like GoStudent, for example, has done really, really well on the B2C side, is that we've acquired a number of companies that's helped us kind of get tentacles out there for every parent that is looking for a tutor across Europe, right? And so at the moment, we don't do a large amount of B2B. We do have one of the portfolio companies that does B2B. Interestingly, they're also the most product-led company. So I think like within this, there's probably a discussion around like, should you be product-led or sales-led? But that's maybe kind of a different tangent to go off on.
Now that you said, like, it was the exact same thing for Babbel. Like, we started like B2C with like B2C business, but then people were like, hey, do you know, I want my company to pay for this. What, don't you have that? And then that's when we build our B2B business. So it's like the same trajectory.
Yeah, which is a really nice thing to have, right? Because like you've built this relationship with them, they trust your brand, they trust what you've done, and then now they trust you enough to take you to their company, right? And those basket sizes are much larger. The sales cycle is a little bit longer, but you know the benefits of, or rather, like you know the customer acquisition cost there. You've already acquired that customer, right? So yeah. I used to read a lot when I was at Hilti, for example. You know, people would always say, no, you either need to be B2B or B2C. You can't do both. And I think it's really cool to see companies that can actually achieve both. I mean, it's not always possible, right? But it's when it does work, it's pretty fantastic.
Sam, I've seen you've been nodding.
Yeah, I think it's all very, very good points, and completely agree. And it's very much what Stripe sees as well. I think the only thing to add that we've seen a lot in the recent parts is the businesses trying to create hybrid strategies, particularly where they have, to your point, Johann, kind of B2C, B2B, and kind of enterprise B2B strategies. So their product can be sold right across the entire market of possible customers. Being able to do that effectively across so many different channels, when your enterprise customer needs a very high touch sales involvement, very bespoke invoicing and contracting and pricing strategy, but your B2C customers don't generate enough revenue for you to even be able to talk to them. So they need to be fully self-service and only be able to interact with you through a web portal. And then you've got a bunch of SME businesses and medium-sized businesses in the middle where they need a hybrid approach of both, maybe some self-service, they might be able to buy the initial product, but they might be upgrading through a sales team. So having capabilities that allow you to go to market across all of the different channels and not have kind of monolithic sales structures across those different channels that don't talk to each other, doesn't allow a customer that was an SMB to actually become an enterprise and buy a multi-year contract, instead of having to kind of cancel them down in one system and recreate them in another system. So having that flexibility is something we're seeing a lot of, particularly B2B SaaS businesses trying to achieve. But I think also across many kind of services businesses that could be sold to both consumer and businesses, like both of you guys, and particularly like Babbel, where that is really important, being able to offer it to both the consumer and the business buyer through a single platform.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think also, like, because you should ultimately personalize for the customer, right? So you should look at how their purchasing workflow, you know, what does that look like, and then adapt your systems for that, whether it's sales or some kind of a PLG flow. Ultimately, I really like what, I don't know if anyone follows Elena Varna on LinkedIn. She's brilliant on PLG and kind of like and sales-led PLG, basically. But she says, you know, you should be profit-led, and I think a lot of companies forget that. Oh yeah, we should be profit-led. It's not whether you should be product-led or sales-led. It's really you should make money, and ultimately whatever works to do that. And usually, what works, I think, is listening to your customers and how you can solve their problems and how they can make a purchasing decision.
Perfect. We are getting first questions from our audience. Let me ask the first one from Yevgenis. Is there any specific tips, best practices for recurring revenue product sales at the beginning of the sales funnel? So when first engaging with leads and people who may be fearful of committing to the subscriptions, any tips on that?
I guess the most obvious tip, and this doesn't work for all businesses, and physical goods businesses particularly this wouldn't work, but free trials are obviously something that you see a lot in kind of businesses where the cost of delivering that good is very low. So you've got very high gross margins, you already built the software, or you already bought the content that you're going to be providing to those consumers, then you can allow a free trial and let the product do the selling for you. I think that's a really important tactic, and really thinking about how you offer free trials, how long, how you engage with consumers and businesses during that free trial period to make sure they convert, and is really important. Are you trying to collect the payment method to convert them up front? Will you allow them to just literally on board with just completing an email address and not putting any kind of commitment? There's different tactics depending on you as a business and how you might want to go to market, but that's something we see a lot of businesses kind of play with to do that, to get over that fear factor of committing to a subscription before they've seen the product.
Yeah. Also on that, beyond free trials, like how much of your content do you want to keep gated versus not, right? And trying to, for the user to be able to reach this aha moment before they need to like hit the paywall, then your conversion might go up. So that's also like a good thing to try out. Like if we put this versus if we put that, and sometimes you might end up realizing that you need to gate it like 100% of your content, and free trial is like the best solution for you. And yeah, there's a lot of stuff that you can play and test around.
I think also like the basket size matters a lot here, right? Because you can probably get someone to pay a small monthly fee, but if you're going above €1,000, for example, you're probably going to have to try a little bit harder. Maybe there's got to be a little bit of a human touch involved there, and this is something that like GoStudent has done quite well. It was before my time when they initiated the free trial, essentially, so they would do a free tutoring lesson. But you know, there was so much excitement after that first lesson. The parents and the students realized, wow, this creates so much value. This is exactly what we needed. And that's the moment where you can have a conversation, build that relationship, and then like go ahead and start to like talk about, okay, now what kind of membership would you like? So I think it's really important to display that value. I think that's the whole tension between kind of product-led growth and sales-led, is that and I don't think it has to be like kind of completely exclusive, mutually exclusive. I think like I would say that we actually do product-led growth at GoStudent through our sales teams, because we allow them to test the product through the free trial. And it's not our typical kind of automated, no human interaction, but we're actually allowing them to have that relationship with the tutor and the parent and the salesperson. But we're doing it kind of through non-tech more conventional means, through phones and things like that. And that's, I think, kind of part of the secret sauce for GoStudent. There's a lot of tutoring marketplaces that were out there, but none of them were able to achieve kind of what we have. And I think one of the things that really worked well was having kind of that human touch for the large basket size.
Super. Sam, anything more?
I don't think so. No.
No. Okay. There are two questions from Ross, and the first one is, how are you using AI as part of your revenue operations? Anyone?
Early days, I think, is probably, I think there's a lot of experimentation going on. I think, Johann, you mentioned certainly one of the areas that Stripe's exploring is customer service. Doesn't really purely touch revenue operations, but would certainly impact churn if you don't do a good job in customer success and customer query processing. Another area that Stripe already uses machine learning models, but not kind of if we're thinking large language models, kind of AI today, but around smart retry. So how do you retry failed payments? How do you prevent involuntary churn? Using big data models to understand how do particular payment methods act in particular countries, such that we can recover as much revenue as possible. And so that's certainly one avenue of machine learning that we're already making available to our customers. But I think there's a lot more that can be done that is still in the works. And I think one of the key ones is churn deflection automation, which I think will be really important. It's still early days in terms of that capability, but using large language models to understand what is this consumer that's come to cancel, what's their previous history, can I really tailor the message and why they should stay on the platform, rather than what happens today with this kind of more generic churn deflection. You've been on the platform 6 months, therefore you get a 20% discount if you try and cancel. That's very broad brushstroke attempt. And I think AI models will give us much more capability to be much more tailored, like you would in a more high touch sales environment to do churn deflection. So having that, I think, is on the horizon, but not yet something that I see a lot of businesses doing, but something that I think is more than possible given some of the tools that are out there now.
Maybe just to add to that, I like a lot of the companies that I've seen and companies I've worked with, often they think of payments and recurring payments as a technical domain, and they avoid kind of the user experience and design part of it, right? So jumping straight to AI, I think, I don't think a lot of companies are even set up for that. I would say like they should get the UX basics right in terms of their recurring revenue. Make it easy to get people back on track for making their payments. Find the touch points to make sure that you can either upsell or cross-sell them. I think there's just a lot of money left on the table because companies just aren't thinking in terms of how they can re-engage like their most passionate customers. But just getting the design right in the dashboard is I think a huge step forward. And before even, I mean, the AI can optimize other things, but just getting your flows in check could help a lot.
I agree with Johann. And also, I think AI is making our product better, right? Like Babbel, we have a speech recognition that is powered by AI. So there's a lot of things that making the product better. Hence, it's helping with recurring revenue because people are happier with the product. So that's step number one. And then we can go into, all the other things that will be available.
Perfect, thank you. And then this other question, much more general, very interesting. What is the biggest issue for you? What is the main pain point in your revenue operations? There must be challenges.
I can give what I hear generically, and then I'd love to hear from Babbel and GoStudent in terms of what they see. If it's very low touch self-service B2C operation, then involuntary churn is something that often businesses bring up, as it can be a lot of money going out the door and a lot of pain for their consumers not being able to consume the product when they thought they could, and often not the consumer having no idea that their card even declined or their payment method, their direct debit, etc. So how do they prevent that is something that is really important, and a really painful kind of area, particularly when businesses have high cost of acquisition for customers. If you're then losing 20% of your business out the door every single month due to involuntary churn, it's pretty painful.
Yeah, I guess that also fraud a bit like related to that on the payment system, like making sure that you don't think, oh, we are doing great, and then it's all like people trying to fraud you, because even if you catch them, like sometimes this revenue, you thought you have that revenue, and then the next month it's like, oh, actually not, actually we need to take this out because it was people just doing chargebacks. So involuntary fraud and chargebacks, refunds, how to manage them is big.
Yeah, from my point of view, and maybe I'm wearing more of my product and design hat here, but like numbers don't really drive numbers, right? Like customer experience drives numbers. Of course, it's good to think about how you can optimize value extraction from those customers. But if you're not providing them with value and they're not passionate about what you're offering them, or you're not changing people's lives, you're probably not going to drive retention, right? So I think it's easy to just kind of look at numbers, but ultimately, like, you should. There's actually a really great podcast on Kleiner Perkins, the VC fund. The podcast is called Grit, and they interviewed a guy called John McNeil, who is an absolutely incredible entrepreneur. He built 6 companies and sold 6 companies. Company 5 and 6 he built at the same time. He's worked for Lululemon, Tesla. I think he's on the board at Lululemon, for example. And he talked about these things called perfect products. They don't offer discounts, but they just create this kind of fervent, like, love for what they're offering. And, like, for me, that's the best way to ensure that you have recurring revenue and that your rev ops is optimized. Because otherwise you're tweaking kind of around the margins, right? And I think once you get to a stage where you've really found that perfect product or product market fit, then optimization around these other things, for me, it's a bit commoditized, right? I mean, and that's why there are products like Stripe out there that are trying to optimize those things for you, right? So I would say 2 things is, like, try to craft that perfect product that really builds kind of passionate customers. And then the other thing is make sure that whatever systems you're using for collecting payments and for recovering payments, make sure that those are optimized either through third-party tools that do this for a living, rather than kind of trying to build your own internal things, especially in the early days, right? If you're Zalando or if you're another scale, it's a different question, right? But I think most companies, like, could benefit from third-party expertise.
Mm-hmm. One more question, this time from Deepanjan. I think it's been at least partially answered, but maybe it would be good to make it clear for the audience. Do we think that startups need a recurring revenue management systems for their startup operations? Sam?
Highly depends. If you're a startup that's gonna be to be successful, you need to have 1,000 customers because your product is $1 a month, then it's going to be very difficult for you to do that fully manually without any automation. If you're going to be a high-touch B2B SaaS selling some very complex AI solution and selling to just Google is success, then absolutely not. And then there's a huge spectrum in the middle of that for you to make a decision as to when. I think most businesses, customer 1 definitely don't need this, no matter what your business is. Customer 10 still probably don't need a billing solution or a revenue management solution. But once you get sort of more than 10 or 20 or 30 customers, then things start to get, and you might want a low-code solution initially, as I said earlier, and then you might want to start scaling to a more automated solution as you start to get hundreds, if not thousands, of customers.
Yeah, my thoughts on this is, and this is a good opportunity to bring up something I wanted to talk about. Elon Musk talks about this idiot tax. I don't know if this is something you've heard of. So it's basically that you're paying margins, you're paying your supplier margins, right? So, like, Lockheed Martin, when they made rockets, they had all these suppliers, and those suppliers had suppliers, and those suppliers had suppliers, and they were all paying each other's margins. So Lockheed Martin, what they had to pay for a rocket was just absurd, right? So, like, I think it's important to think, like, when you're building your product, like what Sam had said, like, how core is payments to that? Should you have an internal team? Should you scale it? And when should you scale it? Or should you just make other people money? And, you know, it's very much dependent on your startup, but think about the margins that those companies are making. And this, you know, what volume of transactions are you looking at? Are there other tools out there that can do the same thing? Can we build it in-house? Like, some of this stuff is really simple. Some of this stuff is really complicated. But I think you need to assess it kind of in those terms.
Perfect, thank you. So now we've talked quite a lot about getting subscribers in. Now I would like to talk a little bit about keeping them with our product. So what do you think are the best strategies for startups to secure the extension of their subscribers, of subscriptions, and how to beat the voluntary and involuntary churn? What are the best ways from your experience?
I think the best way is to provide value, right? Like if you provide value, then you have, you have no problems. I think what Johann said is really true. Like first focus on that, and then you can focus on optimizing. Like a lot of times we lose too much time on just optimizing for the small thing rather than looking at the big pictures and understanding our users and what do they need. So that's also like something really important at Babbel. Our North Star is learner success, which means that actually, to some extent, we won't churn, because if people churn, they have learned the language and they're churning. So we would be happy for some churn. So not all churn is bad. Like we do a lot of this voluntary versus involuntary, but there's this happy churners versus unhappy churners. And this is what you should be optimizing for.
Yeah, I would say similar to that. My old boss, actually, when I was at Hilti, like 6 years ago, he used to repeat this thing all the time, and he didn't know how to do it. He just would repeat this thing. He would say, I want frequent, positive, relevant interactions. And so then I had to like decipher what that means, right? Because he knew that if the customer spoke to us or interacted with us 8 times, they would spend potentially millions with Hilti, right? So and so then I took that into like every product that I've built since then, because they were a B2B product, is very different. But like, I think what does positive, relevant, frequent, relevant interactions mean, right? It can mean a lot of things, but it probably shouldn't mean just because something like they shouldn't be interacting with you because they had a failed payment. That's not positive. It's also, and also they shouldn't be interacting with you because you're trying to upsell them. That's probably not relevant to them, or it could be relevant if it's the right timing, right? So I think just getting those things right, like frequent, positive, relevant interactions, will get you very far.
That's a really nice framework.
Fully agree. And I think obviously coming from a Stripe perspective, we kind of optimize for the kind of tail after you do the core, like to both Sarah's and Johann's point, like making the product as good as possible and making sure you're proving value to your customers over and over again every time they interact, and that they're coming back and actually interacting with the tool, and they're not buying it for a point reason, and then you're trying to keep them for an extended period, even though your expectation is that they're not going to use the product. Then that's obviously going to be very difficult to secure that extension if that extension has an element of interaction by the consumer, because they're making a decision at that point. Did I actually get value in the last month or in the last year from that product? And if they look back and say no, then that's going to be very difficult. Obviously, there are products and solutions out there where the value that you extract from it varies throughout the period, throughout the month, throughout the year. And you might have low periods and high periods, but you want to have a consistent amount of revenue across those periods. And so in those types of solutions, it is important to try and make sure that you're not making it difficult for the customer to continue subscribing. And that's very much where very good billing and subscription management and payment systems are really important, because you don't want to necessarily make it difficult for the customer to continue being a recurring revenue customer for your business. And so automating things like retry strategies rather than emailing them every time there's a failed payment is really important. Giving them the payment method that they want is really important at the point that they want it. These are all kind of really important capabilities. And then from a voluntary churn perspective, I think we talked a little bit about it already, but having processes in place that when a customer goes through voluntary churn, that you have capabilities to re-highlight the value, and you have well thought out and A/B tested deflection processes, because some of these can be quite counterintuitive. So being able to A/B test deflection processes is really important, because it's not necessarily clear maybe just offering a bigger discount is actually worse than offering a smaller discount, because the customer might think, oh, they're devaluing the product this much, that maybe it isn't of as valuable as I thought, whereas a lower discount might actually perform better than a higher discount. So being able to have those types of capabilities is really important, so that you can really test different methods of retaining customers.
Yeah. There's also like two other points that I wanted to bring for when it comes to the challenges for recurrent revenue. I think one of them is, we know, like dormant users. So those users that are not using the product, but, you know, like keep renewing for whatever reason. A lot of times we are so scared of interacting with our, because what if, you know, the dormant users wake up and then they cancel? And something that we did a Babbel like this test that we actually emailed, you know, inactive users to activate them. And it really didn't have a huge impact in our change rate. It had a great impact in our activation rate, and those people that were activated again, they extend for the next period. So I think fear, it's something that we need to be aware when we're looking at our extensions, because we are doing our users a favor, especially for some products like Babbel, right? It's like self improvement type of products that you know, you sometimes need this nudge, and we don't do this because what if, you know, they forgot about the subscription? We know as a fact that a lot of people most people that are still renewing, they know they have the subscription. Me, myself, I had a gym subscription for 4 years without going to the gym, because what if tomorrow I really feel like going to the gym? It's going to be so nice to have a subscription, right? So don't be scared of reaching to inactive users and try to activate them again. And at the end, you don't want to reduce churn by people forgetting about you, but still paying, right? Like, you want to reduce churn because you're providing value to them. And the second point is around understanding your extension data and your cohorts. Something that happened is, so we were seeing our extension rate, we're like, oh, it seems that to be like flat and going a bit down. So, you know, freak out. And everyone, you know, like think, okay, what can we do? And do all these tactics. And then we started to look deeper into the data. We figured out that the extension rates for app users, especially Apple ones, were significantly lower than for web users. Parallel to that, we had more and more share of app sales versus web sales. So what was happening was not that our extension rates were declining, was that our user, you know, I don't know, makeup or revenue makeup was changing. So actually, if you look at web sales, our extension was actually, you know, like on the, you know, app, at the same for the app, but because we were selling more apps than webs, it was like reversing. So I feel like having a really good understanding on how to slice the data, maybe it's the channel, maybe it's a new channel that is actually going to bring that down. So like understanding this is key, because otherwise you might be trying to solve a problem you don't even have.
Yeah, but let me add to that. So like, I think, and that's actually brilliant, Sarah, like really interesting. I think on our side, what we think a lot about is like, how do we add kind of cross-sell opportunities that are really relevant to the customer, right? So can we offer all sorts of different like subjects across, you know, across different markets. And we're constantly thinking of like, can we add something that would keep even that like low monthly fee that will kind of keep people kind of, even if they're kind of less engaged, that they're still with us and they haven't left the GoStudent kind of ecosystem. I think that's is also something we thought a lot about when I was at Grover. Like, how do we get that like subscription that people are like, regardless, are willing to pay for it, and then we can cross sell them to other things. So at first we thought it was headphones at Grover. We were like, hey, well, if we can like get people to pay 10 euros a month for headphones or 5 euros a month for headphones, that'll keep them on the platform, and then they'll keep a relationship with them. With GoStudent, we have memberships for parents, right? So actually we have also like autonomous learning company that we acquired a couple of years ago, GoStudent. GoStudent, and they offer like really great autonomous self-learning, probably a lot like what Babbel offers for language learning, right? And so we see a huge opportunity there to provide people with value in between to keep them around, right? And I think that's like things like, like Amazon's done that really well with Amazon Prime, where it's just like, it's such a no-brainer. Why would you ever not have Amazon Prime? Because it just offers so much value, right? But at the right scale, you can make it work. So yeah, so with GoStudent, like lately, it's been really about, okay, how do we offer all these other cross-sell opportunities, whether it's additional subjects that are kind of parallel to what's being learned, just to keep them within the ecosystem, keep them engaged.
Perfect. Thank you. Super interesting. We've just got one more quite specific question. Do the recurring revenue take always a J-shaped curve, or are we aiming ideally to have a J-shaped curve? What are your experiences? And if you could share them, it's from Deepan Jan, who is a startup founder. Any experiences here?
I'm trying to figure out what.
It's like a knife.
I'm assuming he means getting
product,
understanding product market fit, getting there, and then it just taking off.
Yeah, I mean, that would be, I think that's like
the
the Hollywood story, right?
Yeah.
That's the one that VCs want to tell their LPs, but I don't think it's like that. Like, I mean, it's also what usually my CFO wants to hear from me. They're like, can we do all these things and then that'll happen? And it's like, well, it's not linear usually, especially in product, right? It's like you do a bunch of experimentation and then something happens, but it's not a consistent curve usually. But I think there are companies that get there, right? But those are the ones that kind of, they're outliers, and the media talks a lot about them. But I think for most companies, it's kind of more of an experimentation, a jagged kind of route to getting there. But I guess if you kind of like put it over long term, maybe
you need to go in the upward trend, but
there are companies I think that go the other way around, right? Where they get everything right at the beginning, and then they just, I would argue Zoom is maybe in that category. I don't know.
Perfect. Thank you for this. So we've talked a lot about technicalities and like different techniques of what you've been using in your businesses. I just wanted to ask you, just zoom out a little bit and ask you a more general question. So we are going right now through this economic downturn. Many companies, startups are looking for savings. Many of them are canceling their subscriptions when they don't really, they don't know if they need them or not. And I just wanted to ask you if you see this economic situation as a challenge for subscription businesses in general. I mean, do you see that in your professional life? I mean, is it something that you've experienced? Do you think we can sort of bump out of it somehow? How this general grimness in the economy has affected your startups, or like in general the subscription startups ecosystem?
So, I mean, at Babbel right now, we're still growing, double digits year over year. So we have not really seen that happening, that trend. And I think subscription businesses are in especially a strong position with this environment, because you have already acquired all those users. You just need to double down. How do we make sure they keep extending, they keep seeing the value? And how can you also expand those users? Like, how do you upgrade them, right? Like, find other revenue streams, but you don't need to spend as much money in acquiring users versus in other, in other moments in the economy. So I think if you have a subscription business, you are in a better situation than if not. But that's my...
Yeah, my take on it is maybe going back to what I was saying before, but it's like, are you offering something that's essential? And if you're not, then you're going to have a lot harder time. You're going to have to probably hustle and do all sorts of, things that maybe are not super palatable, or you should just change your core offering. Like, what's the human emotion that you're satisfying with your product, or that emotional or psychological need? Like, is it there, or is it just kind of a nice to have thing? And then that's probably where, you know, I mean, obviously this goes to the core of your company, but I mean, for me, one of the reasons, like when I moved over to GoStudent, I thought, well, you know, like parents need to provide their children with the best education. So I'm like, they're probably not going to, even in the worst economic situation, cut that spend, right? So I think you have to go to thinking about, like, are we really offering the thing that people need, or is it just kind of some kind of a gimmick? So that, I mean, that's step number one. But then I would say also understanding your customers and getting real-time feedback from them in these times is more essential than ever. So a lot of companies don't have happiness tracking or effort scores in place or product market fit scores. And I think that can go a long way towards getting real-time feedback that will help you improve, like your whether it's just reducing friction in your payment flows, or if it's like kind of augmenting your product with other things that people like expect, or that your competitors are providing that you're not. I think a lot of companies don't get that real-time feedback. Maybe they send surveys from time to time, maybe they do user testing, but setting, and what I mean by like happiness tracking, like is getting kind of those customer experience feedback loops into your product, so that like someone completes a certain flow, they're able to give you very specific relevant feedback to that flow. A lot of companies, they have like NPS, or they're tracking CSAT, but that doesn't really give you the company's heartbeat, or the customer's kind of heartbeat. So yeah, I would say like measure better, but also like reconsider whether what you're offering is really essential.
Yeah, I guess the thing to say from Stripe side, so we did recently do a survey on this with a lot of subscription users, and we did find that just under 50% of B2C businesses are seeing an increase in voluntary churn. And in B2B businesses, it's 34% increase in voluntary churn. So I think to both Johann and Sarah's points is very valuable. I think is if you're creating a product that really drives true value, that your business, that your customers are seeing day in, day out, then I think you can be less worried about this subscription fatigue. However, if you're not doing a good job of really understanding the value that your customers get from the product that you're providing, and you're not doing a good job of kind of being close to your users, then there certainly is a sentiment in the market that we should be reviewing the number of recurring payments that are going out and making decisions as to where to belt tighten. I think we've seen this very strongly in the streaming space, where there's been a kind of explosion of potential options and content, and a lot of money spent by different businesses to create content, and a lot of people subscribed when we spent a lot of time at home in 2021, so probably needed to consume a lot of content, and now consumers are making some decisions as to how many of these we need. If you're in a industry where that is also true, with many potentially customers having many subscriptions that have relatively similar utility, then I think you need to be really thinking hard about voluntary churn and how you prevent it, and how you make sure that you're providing the value your customers want, and you're reminding them of that value in a repeatable motion.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much. We still have a couple of minutes left. So if there are any last minute questions, please send them our way. Also, we've touched upon many different topics today from many different angles. But I just wanted to ask the panelists if there is anything you think that we should have discussed or we should have mentioned when it comes to recurring revenue and we haven't. Now is the time to get to this. Is there anything else? No,
I mean, I would just say, because I always wear my product and design hat, like get creative, right? It's not just numbers driving numbers. Always question that, because often we sit in these meetings and we just look at the spreadsheet and then we try to come up with solutions, but that's probably not the place you should be brainstorming solutions. You should be going back to customers, designing stuff, prototyping stuff, getting feedback, and seeing what's driving the numbers, whether it's through A/B testing or just kind of gut feeling, I have good taste and I'm going to try this thing. But I would say get creative, because you can do a lot more when you have the ingredients to build this stuff in the room. Just sitting around a board table looking at a spreadsheet is not going to solve your recurring revenue problems.
Yeah, like the numbers tell you the what, but they don't tell you the why. And a lot of times you just focus on the what, but not the why. So you're not doing the right, you're making the right decisions to solve for that what.
Yeah, and I guess just to finish that, Stripe's overall, or one of its kind of main core tenets is be user first. So speak to your users, try and find hero users of your product, trying to find out why they cared so much about it, and try and work out how you can replicate that across your entire customer base. That's very much the approach that Stripe has taken with building its product. So yeah, just encourage all the founders out there to do something similar. The more you speak to the customers, the more you learn, and that can inform why you're seeing what you're seeing in your spreadsheets.
I can attest to that. Like Babbel is just implementing Stripe, so I can attest that they are doing a good job there.
Yeah, I mean, I also props to Stripe. I think it's a great company. I think the way they do product development is fantastic. So yeah, we're also happy Stripe customers. It feels like an infomercial for Stripe now.
Yeah, we used the last minute for Stripe commercial. That's great. That was, I think, Sam, that was a very nice finishing line. Thank you so much, everyone, for your participation. Thank you, the participants, the audience, for taking part, for tuning in. It was very interesting for me. I also hope it was very helpful to all of you who run your own businesses and maybe think of setting up or like recreating your recurring revenue strategies in your companies. So thank you so much for sharing your experience, and see you next time during the next Sifted Talk.